Hello again, Netrunner fans, Willingdon here, and today we're going to talk about one of the most important cards in Android Netrunner, that's Jackson Howard. Sometimes called the savior of the corporation, no card is as widely played on either side of the game as Jackson Howard. This is because Jackson serves a variety of essential roles for the corporation, allowing for proper agenda management, access to economic or defensive tools, and recursion capability of powerful effects. The most common and most important reason that corporations use Jackson Howard is to control their access to agendas throughout the course of the game. If you draw too many agendas early in the game, your HQ can be extremely vulnerable to the runner's attack. Jackson Howard allows us to get some of our agendas out of our hand and reshuffled back into R&D. This is accomplished by using Jackson Howard's draw ability to draw over your maximum hand size, and then at the end of your turn you can discard the extra agendas. If your opponent goes to access them in the archives, you can just shuffle them back in with Jackson Howard. Of course, if we're playing as the runner and we know that our opponent has made a play like this, there's a few things that we can do to take advantage of the situation. Our first play relies on the first principle of playing against Jackson Howard. Don't leave him in play for too long. If our opponent just discarded 2 or 3 cards, it's likely that he just discarded an agenda or two. For this reason, we should pretty quickly run archives or the Jackson Howard to force the issue with him and not let him stay in play to draw more cards on the next turn. This could also work to our advantage if we're looking to run R&D. If our opponent reshuffles the agendas he just discarded back into the R&D, we're going to be more likely to access an agenda when we access on R&D. In other words, it makes a lot more sense to force your opponent to reshuffle with Jackson first before accessing R&D than it does to run R&D and then force a shuffle with Jackson. Forcing the use of a Jackson this early also feeds into the second principle of playing against Jackson Howard. Your opponent only gets 3 uses of him per game. If we force our opponent to shuffle in these agendas early in the game, they're not going to be able to use Jackson to shuffle in more exciting cards later on. Forcing the issue early in the game is going to limit the number of choices our opponent has when they use the Jackson. If you find your opponent using Jackson over the course of several turns, try to imagine what type of card your opponent is looking for. Are they just looking for burst economy cards like Hedge Fund? Are they trying to find an agenda because they've got a good remote set up and they're ready to score? Are they trying to find some more ice because they're worried about you attacking R&D? If your opponent's drawing lots of cards and isn't discarding any or playing any agendas, it's likely that he's stockpiling agendas in HQ. It might be good to attack your opponent's HQ if he's drawn a large number of cards and hasn't either discarded cards or played down and scored agendas. The main takeaway from these different tidbits is that Jackson Howard is supremely good at agenda control, and we need to attack him as quickly as possible and not leave him in play for too long. Remember, our opponent's only going to get 3 uses, so the quicker that we can get him to use those 3 uses, the quicker he'll be out of Jackson Howard. Let's take a look at some tactics against Jackson Howard that relate to specific card effects. Jackson Howard's remove from game ability is not just recursion, it's also a shuffle effect. So keep that in mind when you're playing a card like indexing. You don't want to stack your opponent's deck and have their juicy agendas on top, only to have our opponent shuffle with Jackson Howard once we run the second time. It would be better to try to find the Jackson Howard in play, get rid of him, and then play the indexing. Conversely, this could work in our favor. Imagine that we have medium in play and we've charged it up a few counters. If we force our opponent to shuffle back agendas or somehow use Jackson Howard, we're going to get to access fresh cards with medium. If we're playing as the corporation, Jackson Howard can be really nice to get out from under a medium or an R&D interface. If we're stuck in R&D lock with our opponent seeing every card that we draw, we can use Jackson Howard to either draw enough cards that we're seeing fresh cards, or just shuffle with his ability and hopefully draw some agendas from there. Another play that comes up time to time with Jackson is if he's the only card in a server and your opponent uses him, that destroys the server. So if we use a Dirty Laundry on a Jackson Howard, our opponent can use the Jackson Howard and the server will be destroyed and the run immediately ends. This doesn't count as a successful run, nor does it count as an unsuccessful run, the big consequence here being that we won't get our 5 credits from Dirty Laundry. It's not exactly possible to play anti-Jackson Howard cards, but one of the common ways that people play against Jackson Howard is through the use of the card Hades Shard. The big thing about Hades Shard is it allows you to access the archives before your opponent gets a chance to use the Jackson Howard. This is accomplished by installing the Hades Shard and then immediately using it. Our opponent isn't going to get an opportunity to use his Jackson Howard before we access the archives. This can be really mean because our opponent won't be able to shuffle agendas back, and this can potentially win us the game if we're really smart about the timing. Well, I hope that this gave you a few basic tactics that you can think about with Jackson Howard. He's in essentially every corporation deck, so playing with and against Jackson Howard is an essential skill for every Netrunner player. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please click that subscribe button and the button that looks like a thumbs up, and I'll see you again for some more Netrunner stuff.